Hello and welcome back to the inspiring episode 2 of the Female Property Expert podcast. Today, we're going to dive deep into 7 distinct property strategies, unraveling their unique facets and weighing up the pros and cons for each one. Knowledge is your compass, and by the end of this episode, you'll be armed with the insights to confidently embark on the next phase of your property investment journey. Remember, property, when done right, is more than just lucrative. It can be deeply rewarding and downright enjoyable. Picture this: the potential to earn 6 or even 7 figures, sculpting a life where your dreams actually become a reality. More time, more freedom, and those cherished holidays that you've always yearned for. Just imagine, because in the realm of property, your aspirations aren't just dreams. They really are possibilities waiting for you to realise them. So let's unlock the doors to your property journey with 3 powerful options. Option A: you buy a property, rent it out, and let it grow in value. Option B: buy a property, give it a glow up, and then sell it on for profit. Or option C: invest your money in an existing project, letting your investment work for you, but not actually being involved in it. Now, envision your property action plan. You choose your working areas, discover the right properties, fund your adventures. We're going to cover more about this on other episodes. Decide your exit strategies. Are you going to rent or sell? In the diverse world of UK property, there is a strategy for everyone. It's about finding what resonates with you, considering your risk tolerance, your initial cash up front, and perhaps your credit score. Your property journey is uniquely yours. And although I'm here to make it simple and inspiring, ultimately, it is your choice. Here are 7 different property strategies I'm going to cover today. Number 1, passive investing. Number 2, HMOs, or house of multiple occupation. Number 3, single lets, or what they're known as buy-to-lets. Number 4, house flipping. Number 5, rent-to-rent. Number 6, commercial property. And number 7, development property. Did you know that 90% of today's millionaires own a property portfolio? That's why property can and is so lucrative. Let's start with passive investing. This type of investment is where you use your own personal or business funds to fund a project which you're not actively involved in. You're simply the investor, the one who provides the funds. The developer or the builder will be doing all of the actual work to find, build, and then sell the sites. This strategy is more common with high net worth individuals who are looking for a kind of passive return on their investment. That said, we recently have had investors approach us. She had been through a divorce, but didn't have enough money to buy another house outright. So she decided her strategy was to invest it for 5 years. And at the end of the 5 years, she will have accrued enough interest on her investment to buy her dream home outright. The average investment in the UK can yield between 7 and 12% per year, depending on the project. Let's look at the pros. Good returns on investment, completely passive income. Often it's secured against a property or has a first charge on an actual property. And it's reasonably stress-free. The cons are your funds are tied up for the duration of the project. Not all developers or builders are genuine. You have to pay for the legal contracts to be drawn up, so there is some initial outlay. And there are rules around lending money which you must abide by. HMOs, house of multiple occupancy. These are often referred to as student digs. But you can have professional HMOs now. HMOs have multiple different people, students or professionals, living together in one property. It is rented out on a room-by-room basis and has an ensuite or possible shared shower facilities and a shared communal area, such as a kitchen and a lounge. HMOs of certain size will need planning permission, and they will also need license from the local council. And they have a number of legislations that must be adhered to. Some are annual checks, for example, fire alarm systems. Now, different councils have different rules, so you need to check with your local authority, as some have what we call an Article 4, which means no HMOs will be granted permission in a certain area under permitted development. You will need to get planning permission for it. HMOs are great cash generators as you rent the rooms out per bedroom. So if you have a 3-bedroom house with 2 reception rooms, you could potentially turn one of the reception rooms into a bedroom, so it becomes a 4-bedroom house. If you rent a 3-bed house to a single family, it might get you around £850 to £1,100 a month. But if you rented the same house as a 4-bedroom HMO, it could net £450 per room, which will give you a return of around £1,800 per month. Now, this is, of course, is before costs and expenses. Depending on who you rent to, a student will typically stay for a fixed amount of time based on their university course or length, but often go home for up to 4 months when unis are closed. A professional is likely to stay longer and have no void gaps, as it is based on their work commitments within that area. Here are some pros. Experienced landlords do very well with HMO portfolios. It's a higher cash flow, which means higher profit. The property will still generate money even if the tenant leaves. There are a number of companies that you can pay to manage your HMO, so it can become almost passive. Here are the cons. The initial capital outlay is higher as you need to bring the house to the HMO standards. There is a lot of legislation around HMOs and it changes regularly, and you'll be required to keep yourself updated. If you manage it yourself, it is high maintenance. There is a high turnover of tenants, so the property goes through a fair amount of wear or damage, which will need constant monitoring and management. Now let's move to buy-to-lets. This is where most property investors dip their toe in to start with. It's great for beginners who've got very little knowledge of the industry, and they are often easier to get set up. There are a number of buy-to-let mortgages out there, which are easy to secure and aren't based on solely your income or age. Some people become accidental investors where perhaps a parent has passed away and left them a property which they now want to rent out as an investment to create regular income. The buy-to-let method is simple. You find the right property, buy it, perhaps do some modernisation to the property if it needs it, and then rent it out. The average rental on an interest-free mortgage will give you returns of around £300 to £800 per month. This is before costs, and it depends on where it's located in the UK. There is another bonus to keeping a rental property. It often increases in value. So not only do you get a rental income, but you also have capital growth in the actual property. Like any rental, there is a lot of legislation. So for me, I always give it to a letting agent to manage. It costs around 10 to 12% per month, but it means they keep ahead of all legislation and it gives me an almost passive income. Cons. The initial capital outlay is higher as you will need to bring the property up to rental standards. There is a lot of legislation around buy-to-lets and you will be required to adhere to them by law. Often, tenants will stay for 12 to 18 months. So the turnover and the costs for every tenant coming in and out can seem slightly higher. Insurance. You'll be required as a landlord to have landlord insurance. Now, this can be quite costly depending on where the property is. Pros: it's suitable for beginners. There's less void periods because your tenants tend to stay longer, and then once they've served notice, you would move somebody in almost within 5 to 10 days of your tenant moving out. If it is managed, it can become a passive income. It can give you a regular income and also see an increase in profits for the property when it's sold further down the line. And the deposit for here is 25%. House flipping. This is a very popular strategy amongst property investors, and it can give really good returns if it's done properly. It's also known as house flipping or flipping in the industry. So property is often brought at auction, it's modernised or extended, and then in theory it's sold on for a profit. Now, this strategy can go horribly wrong if you don't buy the property at the right price to start with. Often property advertised through Rightmove and Zoopla are inflated, and if you don't do your research, you will see that the average house price in that road in 2022 sold for £30,000 less than the current asking price. This means that the property is being marketed for £230,000 and its actual resale value is only around £200,000. Now, this means you will need to buy it at £150,000, for instance, to make it a viable property investment. This is known as what we call a below market value, or BMV. As you have brought it below the average house price that has been sold on that road, you also need to be mindful that if some BMVs, or below market value properties, often have defects and need a lot of modernisation, so the costs can creep up. So make sure you've done your due diligence first. As long as the value of the property increases with the work you're completing, it's fine. But if the value does not increase, so perhaps, for instance, there's a ceiling limit in the street that you're working in that properties have sold for, then you may lose money. The average refurbishment cost is anything between £8,000 to £25,000, depending on the work that you're going to do. And this is only a guide. Obviously, the volume of work and the volume of structural work may increase that. So the pros: it has potential to create large profits. There's no tenant or letting agents to deal with. There's no real legislation other than building control and planning if required. You can access your money quicker because often you can get in and get out quickly. And property can increase in value in a short period of time from purchase to sale. The cons are there's no regular income month by month. You need to be good at sticking to a budget. It's not passive. You will need to be involved in the whole process from start to finish. If you buy at an inflated price, you could lose money. And there are often hidden surprises with properties brought at auction. Rent to rent. Rent to rent is another common strategy used for new investors as it has a very quick cash flow return. The strategy is where a managing agent or company may guarantee a fixed rent fee to the landlord in exchange for using the property for its workers or perhaps as an HMO. It is very important that you get the permission of the property owner before you do rent to rent, protecting you, the tenant, and the property owner. Rent to rent means you don't need a large upfront deposit like you would do when buying a house. The costs for starting are fairly low and the returns can be good. Now, let's look at the pros. Less upfront costs, can be profitable, creates a monthly income, can access money quicker. Cons: because you don't own the property, you don't get the increase in value as the property increases. High maintenance to manage and paperwork must be correct. Errors can be costly. You agree to a rent guarantee even if you struggle to fill the rooms. A lot of landlords seem sceptical of this process, so it will be hard to convert a landlord without the right information given to them. Commercial properties. So most property investors pick either residential or commercial property when they start their first property journey. The majority of investors opt for residential routes as they feel they know more about it and it's more readily available, as there are always tenants looking for somewhere to live. Now, this creates an opportunity for the commercial investor as there's not as many investors vying for those properties. Now, commercial property often leases for longer periods of time, anything from 5 to 25 years, which means you get a long-standing tenant. Commercial leases can also stipulate that the leaseholder must maintain and repair the property, so the ongoing costs are a lot lower. The risk to the property owner is based on whether the current tenant renews the lease or if the tenant goes bust. This results in the property being empty, and it could take a number of months to find a new tenant. You may need to refurbish, for instance, a shop ready for a new tenant, depending on whether it was left in an acceptable standard originally. And during the COVID pandemic, we saw a number of businesses close their doors forever and change their working practices so that their staff work from home. This meant offices were no longer needed, and it's created large voids in the commercial sector as property owners struggle to fill their units. So the pros: longer tenancies. Tenants can be responsible for repairing and maintenance of the property. The land and property values will increase over time, creating capital gain. Not as much competition in this sector. Can be fairly passive as an investment. And the tax is more favourable in a commercial property. The cons: the economy can affect how the tenants trade and subsequently result in no tenant. You may be left with a property that needs work done, but the tenant has gone bust, so you will need to pay the repairs yourself. Deposits can be higher. Mortgages are often based on property condition and length of tenancy. It can take longer to find a new tenant. If you agree a rent guarantee, it can have severe impacts in the event this cannot be adhered to. You have legal duty to ensure the property is commercially fit for rental. And lastly, let's look at development. Property development is one of the most profitable ways to make money from property, but it is also the riskiest business. Without the right advice and education, it can go wrong. The definition of a property developer is simply someone who makes a living from building new property or renovating existing homes to then sell on for profit. Straightforward enough, right? Wrong. Property developers need a knowledge of the process involved, and you can only get this by educating yourself. For instance, you don't need to be a qualified planning consultant, but you do need to understand how planning works so you can find a suitable site which has the ability to gain planning uplift, for instance. Often you can buy a site with planning, but you need to understand the planning conditions and the architect's drawings to then be able to price up the build costs. On average, the financial returns are around 20 to 25% of the GDV, or gross development value. There are many occasions where you may see up to 50% return if you've bought very wisely. This strategy is the quickest way to reach financial freedom, but it does come with its fair share of stress. You need to work well under high pressure, be good at problem solving, have a good understanding of the process, and have a great team around you who can help you deliver the project. Let's look at the pros. It's the most profitable strategy. It's an enjoyable process if you get it right. You gain a great reputation with investors, banks, and your fellow peers. Will give you the freedom and the lifestyle that you've wanted, and can give you a rental portfolio alongside your development company. Here are the cons. Educating yourself costs time and money. You normally need money behind you to start, even if it's someone else's money. Banks are reluctant to lend to inexperienced developers or will lend at higher interest rates. You need to be good working with different trade people, timelines and deadlines. The risks are higher as you are normally borrowing much more funds. So now we've covered all 7 different strategies and some pros and cons that sit with them. What's next? Now you have a choice. What strategy is right for you? How much do you need to live the life that you've actually always dreamed of? And more crucially, what's your next step? Which strategy is going to suit you best? You need to look at your time. You need to look at your funds for investment. You need to look at the skills that you have already and the skills around you. Do you know plumbers and electricians who can help you? You need to educate yourself. Thank you for taking the time to join us for our 2nd episode of the Female Property Expert podcast. Next week, we are going to look at why location is so important. So please come back, join us, like and share, and add any comments that you feel you would like to learn more about, and we'll see if we can run a podcast alongside that. Thank you, and we'll see you for episode 3 next week.